It's no secret that anything post-apocalyptic you could think of has probably taken a page or two out of Mad Max, and for good reason. There's just so much to love about these movies, like the explosive high-speed car chases, their reliance on practical effects, the cast of lovable cracked-out characters that give way to funny little scenes like this. Or the amount of effort director George Miller puts into the world building. All the tiny little things that make it seem like this lawless wasteland still has some culture and order, with there being all these wackadoo religions and factions and these beastly machines made from repurposed scraps and relics from a bygone era. I could go on about Mad Max for the entirety of this video because it's easily one of my favorite film series, and with the recent release of Furiosa, I've taken it upon myself to rewatch all of the movies, and doing all of that has given me a bit of a hankering to go back and play the old Mad Max game. You know, the one that came out in 2015 shortly after Fury Road's release, and everyone very quickly forgot about it because it was released on the same day as Phantom Pain. Critics also weren't too happy about the game either. Yeah, that one. After having dumped almost 100 hours on it, I gotta say, it's alright. There's definitely things to be enjoyed here. The combat both on foot and in vehicle is simple yet satisfying. The atmosphere in this game is incredible, and the game can be fun, but truthfully I think the Ubisoft open world formula it follows of you having to liberate multiple camps and scouting out areas of the map can become a little draining and boring after a while. There's also not much to write home about when it comes to the story. Excuse me. That is my producer calling me. Hello? Do I know what I'm supposed to be doing? Yeah, I'm supposed to be covering the Mad Max game, like you said, right? What do you mean I'm not covering the right game? How many Mad Max games are there? Oh my god, you're worse than my mother. Okay, which one am I supposed to be covering then? Oh. Whoops. Okay, jokes aside, I was originally planning on talking about this game and then working my way back to these, but since Furiosa just came out, there's a lot more attention and talk about this game now, so I think making a dedicated video on it is a little unoriginal at this point. On top of that, for some of my subscribers, you might be well aware of the fact that it takes me forever to cover a whole game series. Like, it's been a year since I've done anything to follow up on my Rayman video, like I'm just about as bad as Ubisoft. Anyways, before I get started, I do want to make a few things clear. One is that information on these games is incredibly sparse, and most of it isn't backed up properly, so don't take a lot of what I say as gospel. Also, because of that, get used to me using words like apparently, supposedly, presumably. You could probably make a fun drinking game out of that if you want. Secondly, I do want to give a special shout out to Mad Max Bible. His video, The History of Mad Max Video Games, brought so much of this information to light, and if it wasn't for that video, I'd never even learn about the existence of these games. So check him out when you've got the time. Now we've got quite a lot to talk about, and to quote a character from Mad Max 2015,
"Now this is gonna take some time, so get comfy."
The first game on our list is Mad Max for the NES, released sometime July 1990 and developed by Grey Matter, Mindscape, and in collaboration with Eastridge Technology. And that's all I know. Yeah, like I said, there's really not a whole lot of documentation when it comes to these games, but I'm still gonna try and make this as edumatational as I possibly can. I was able to find some background info on who these companies are. Established in 1983, Mindscape was part developer, part publisher. The ownership of them has been tossed around a whole bunch by a lot of different companies throughout their entire lifespan. The first of which was Toolworks in 1989, a company known for Chessmaster 2000 and The Masterpiece. That is, Mario is missing. Then in 1994, they were bought out by Pearson. Yes, that Pearson, the company that makes goddamn textbooks, for a whopping $462 million. Pearson had high hopes for Mindscape, being confident that they were capable of making great video games and wanted to give them a better foothold in the market. Unfortunately, they sort of set themselves up for failure on that. The only profitable thing Mindscape has ever done under Pearson's wing was making Lego Island in 1997. A year later, Pearson sold Mindscape only for $150 million to the Learning Company. This is where Mindscape stayed until they eventually shut their doors in 2011. Gray Matter was started up in 1985 by Chris Gray, who at the time was only 17 along with his brother Nick. Gray Matter was a studio that quickly developed a bit of a knack for making cheap licensed games, most of which were published by Mindscape, like Dirty Harry, The Terminator, and Captain Planet, so of course it'd only be natural for an opportunity like a Mad Max video game to fall right into their laps. Then there was Eastridge Technology that started up around the same time. These guys normally did a lot of work for Gray Matter and were usually also contracted by Mindscape, and when I say guys, I mean it might have just been the owner Nick Eastridge and his hired composer Rich Shamaria. Interesting note about Eastridge is that they're the only one of these companies that are still up and running, though they've shifted focus away from video games to just computer software. I'm not entirely sure how this game came to be, but according to Mad Max Bible, after the release of Beyond Thunderdome, Mad Max as a movie series was lying dormant for way too long, and Warner Bros weren't too pleased by that, so they gave the license to some random game studio to try and keep garnering interest in the franchise. The end result of that was this. Quite amazing, isn't it? I'll be honest, I really don't know how to describe this game. Obviously, you play as Max, and you get to ride around on his interceptor, you can throw dynamite to get past roadblocks, you gotta swerve past these crazies that are out to get you, as well as these towers that also chuck dynamite. And what's your goal in this game? Oh. Consulting the manual, it turns out your whole goal is to make it to an arena. However, it's not as simple as just driving from point A to point B. For starters, you don't have nearly enough fuel to make the trip, and secondly, you'll need to buy an arena pass in order to get access to it, which can be purchased at a service station with food and water, that you'll get by raiding bandit camps scattered around the level. The thing is though, there's not really a map to tell you exactly where you need to go. I mean, okay, they were nice enough to give you a map for level 1 in the manual, but just look at this thing. It's very rudimentary and also not entirely accurate, but I guess it'll do. So all you need to do now is to explore as much as you can and figure out which camps are the best to hit up in the early game without wasting too much of your fuel and resupplying yourself well enough to buy that arena pass. I've made my own little strat on what I think the best way of doing this is. As soon as you spawn in, start making your way to this cave right here. It's in the most inconvenient spot out of all of them, so it's a bit of a pain to backtrack to if you saved it for later. On top of that, it also gives you enough food and water to buy the arena pass right off the bat. The interior of these camps always generates the same for every run, so it's all just a matter of memorizing their layout. Max is also given his gun when he enters these camps, but it's definitely not his trusty double barrel, I can tell you that. And I know this because you can fire in semi-auto or completely burn through your ammo by going full auto. As amusing as that is, though, it is absolutely unnecessary. The enemies here are dumb enough for you to walk past them, so it's only really helpful in some very tough situations, like when the game occasionally decides to go crazy with their spawns. After you're done with the cave, just hit up all the others in every quadrant of the map and make pit stops at the stations, ideally just to refuel so you can get to the arena. Repairing your car is good too, but you burn through gas so fast and it's really hard to come by, so it's almost not even worth spending food and water on anything else. And I'll be honest, whipping around on the mighty V8 isn't really all that it's cracked up to be. I mean, it accelerates fast like you might expect, but it turns like a boat. I'm partially convinced that it's not even the controls that make it bad, it's just the level design. It's not built around the way the Interceptor handles. There's way too many things scattered on the road that you can barely avoid with how this thing turns. And I guess you could say, "Oh, just drive slow, dummy." Well, yeah, I could do that if I want my car to get totaled in like 10 seconds. Trust me, there's like no comfortable pace you could cruise around in. You're bound to take damage from something no matter how fast you go. Also, these towers can snipe you with dynamite from like halfway across the map. They're dumb, I hate them. Okay, finally we made it to the arena. Here there's a certain number of enemy cars that spawn in that you need to destroy. I think the game expects you to actively participate in these by bumping them off the road. And that just seems like way too much work, so I figured out they could easily bait them into these pitfall traps. It takes a minute, but it works. After finishing the arena, you move on to the next level, and like I said, they only made a map for level 1, so you're entirely on your own now. How you want to go about doing this is up to you, whether you want to try and memorize the whole level from top to bottom, try to map everything out yourself, or just pull up a map from Google like me. Yeah, whatever, I don't care. Look, sorry, but I just do not have the time to be scribbling out a map for a game like this. I haven't even mentioned the fact that once you defeat all the bad guys in the arena, you're not just magically teleported to the next level, no, you still have to find the exit. The first arena isn't so bad with this, but the last one requires almost a full tank of gas to get through. Thankfully, there are level and arena passwords, so you don't have to restart from the very beginning, but still, this entire aspect of the game just does not sound entertaining or satisfying to me in any way whatsoever. This next level is exactly the same stuff, by the way. Hit up the bandit camps, buy the arena pass as soon as you can, survive, make it to the arena, survive again, and it's on to level 3. Disregarding the change in hue, this level is a little different in that it might look a bit intimidating at first glance. There's only 2 caves close to your spawn, and even then they're still a good drive away from you, so you kind of have to pray and hope that they stock you up well enough to make it through the straight road to hell before you can get to your 3rd cave. Thankfully, it's not as bad as it looks. The caves are a bit more loaded, that is if you manage to navigate through the labyrinths that they are, and you do also have an additional thing you need to collect now, and that is the crossbow. You'll need this to fight the final boss, Lord Humongous from Road Warrior. I'm not gonna lie, I really couldn't be bothered with this boss fight. At this point, I was just about done with this game. And never mind the fact that Humongous is a complete sponge, requiring you to hit him several times just to knock off 1 health point, and the only thing you get for beating him and finishing the game is just this end screen. Which is really just a ginormous middle finger to the people who had the ironclad patience to play through this game as intended. And where does a man like Max go from here? I don't know, straight into the bargain bin probably. So it shouldn't come as much of a shocker that this first Mad Max game wasn't received very well. People critique the terrible controls, the cryptic level design, the harsh difficulty, and the annoying resource management aspect of it. People point the finger at Mindscape for making the game so bad, but I think that's just unfair. After all, they weren't really the only ones working on it. Who am I kidding? It's entirely their fault. Apparently, Mindscape had a bad habit of setting strict time limits, so in order to meet the deadline, Grey Matter and Easteridge would oftentimes cut a lot of corners on their games or just straight up copy their previous work. In the case of Mad Max, it is literally a ripoff of their 1988 game Road Raider, also known as Motor Massacre in Europe. When another company, Graft Gold, was tasked with making a game for the film The Last Starfighter, Graft Gold and Easteridge, who was a contracted programmer on the project, just took their previous title Iridium and added in a few extra details to make it seem somewhat connected to the film. Looking further into it, it is honestly amazing how terrible of a company Mindscape was. There's this YouTuber by the name of Midlife Crisis Media that was actually part of a focus group to beta test Mad Max when he was in his teens. He volunteered because they were promising that he was able to get 2 free Mindscape games of his choice for participating. However, his experience with this was far from perfect.
I got chosen to go last, so when I get my chance to speak, I'm a huge fan of this trilogy of movies at that point. I have seen each of them many, many times, and I hated the game, and I told them so. I gave it to them right to their face, these 2 people that were interviewing us. I told them that I thought the graphics were shit, and that they were lazy programmers because they just kept repeating the same levels, just with different color palettes swapped out just to save on time. The controls were some of the worst I'd ever played. It was not intuitive at all. It was hard to control. The difficulty was just up there. What you needed to do in the game to progress was so vague. The instructions didn't even really tell you what you needed to do. And the people that were interviewing me are like taking these furious notes, and they're like, "Oh my god, that is such a good idea," and like, "Oh, Thunderdome, wow, why didn't we think of that?" Probably because they never saw the goddamn movies. And like, "Oh, the controls need to be tweaked. Okay, how about that?" And I'm sitting there going like, "Oh my god, I'm actually contributing something to this game." And I was kind of happy. I was just like, someone's actually listening to me and taking my feedback seriously, and I might actually help make a better game. If that's the case, then I can't wait to own it. So I picked my 2 games, and the games that I picked, I didn't want the ones that Mindscape had already released, like Last Starfighter, Days of Thunder, and all that, because I'd already rented them and I thought they were shit. So I picked 2 games that were that were going to be released in the future. One was 720 Degrees, the skateboarding game by Atari that they had done a port of, and the other was another Atari port called Road Blasters, which is like a car combat game. And they told me that when they were released, I would get sent them in the mail. I did get 720, and I did not like it because the controls were shit, and it was not fun to play. And they completely shafted me on Road Blasters. I never got a copy of that at all. So not only did I get forced to play this crap game for a month, they lied to me about how my feedback was going to change the game for the better. And not only that, but like all the time I put in it hoping that I was going to get these, these 2 free games. They didn't even give me one of them because they're probably like, well, fuck that kid. He told us our game was crap and we thought it was awesome from the get-go. And to prove to everybody out there in internet land that I'm not making up this story, I'm going to show you something to prove it, that I did actually do all this. Here's the Mad Max instruction book, okay? Inside, on the front cover, is the special thanks. And lo and behold, there's my name right there, Chris Pico. I don't know if you can see it. But yeah, Chris Pico, right there. So, there you go.
Despite the negative reception, Mindscape kept pushing on, this time without the help of Grey Matter and East Ridge. For their next project, they were going at it completely alone and grabbing that proverbial bull by the horns. This next project was Mad Max the Video Game 2, released in 1992 on the Sega Genesis, then a year later on the Super Nintendo. Actually, it was called Outlander. It was originally supposed to be a sequel to the NES game, but they lost the license to Mad Max late into this game's development, so they had to change some things up in order to avoid legal issues. Supposedly, they couldn't get the license back because Miller was quite pissed off by how terrible the first Mad Max game was. So, much like how Nintendo is with most of their IPs, Miller started keeping the rights to Mad Max under a heavy lock and key. Because of that, we ended up with this really weird game that's in a middle ground between being a new idea and just being a rip-off Mad Max, mostly leaning towards the latter. Like, that is just Mel Gibson. They didn't even try to change up his likeness even a little. That is definitely the Interceptor, and Wish.com Max even has his iconic Wish.com double barrel. Honestly though, I was actually really looking forward to playing this. I watched a bit of gameplay footage before jumping into it, and I was amazed. Like, I was sitting thinking to myself, damn, it seems like Miller sort of missed out on this because it looks like Mindscape was actually kinda cooking with this. On the Genesis version, you're placed right into the driver's seat of the Interceptor and you're speeding down the highways of the Outback while popping bikers coming up on your side view. Like, this is Mad Max to a T. Then occasionally you get to pull over to some nearby town and the game turns into a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you're punching hillbillies and stealing resources. Like, yeah, man, this looks awesome. People in the comments were even saying things like, this game is a hidden gem, an underrated masterpiece, it should have gotten more love. But when I eventually got around to playing it myself, yeah, actually it is surprisingly good. Fun fact, I had to rewrite this entire part of the script because I didn't like Outlander all that much at first, but the more I played it, the more it kinda grew on me. What threw me off of Outlander so much was that videos online made it seem way easier than it actually is. Like, you look at this and you think it's all simple and straightforward, when in actuality it demands quite a good bit of multitasking, and admittedly, it's an aspect of the game that is a bit flawed, but enjoyable if you can nail it down. Like the gunplay, if you can even call it that. I find it to be way too precise for this kind of gameplay. There's very little room for error when it comes to shooting these bikers, so you have to line up your shots in order to get a hit. On top of that, there's range you have to take into account as well, all the while you're trying to maintain a consistent speedy pace and avoiding other obstacles on the road, or whatever's happening here. I had a very hard time playing this game at first. I really struggled trying to divide my focus between all of these things, and because of that, it resulted in some less than stellar driving skills. I'm not bumping into these road signs because I'm a terrible driver, no, I'm doing it for extra points, I swear! But yeah, it made for an experience that I initially found to be a little too hectic, overwhelming, and a bit nauseating to be honest. Another little flaw I should bring up is that the button to shoot the shotgun is the same one you use to fire the Interceptor's forward-facing machine guns, so even when you get a perfect hit, you still wind up wasting ammo. As you can tell, there's not really much of a HUD either. Obviously you got this stuff up top. Ammo, nitro, missiles, soda, OJ, purple stuff, Sunny Delight, I don't know, you don't need to worry about any of this garbage until later. All the important stuff is on your dashboard. There's oil, which is your health, I have no idea what this thing is, and fuel. Make sure you're on top of this stuff because once you start running low, your car produces quite possibly the worst sound in a video game you've ever heard. You also have your blinkers that will tell you which side of the road to pull over in order to get into a town. It's generally agreed upon that these beat 'em up sections suck. They're not very exciting, the controls are stiff, the hit registry is off, and there's like 3 enemies you fight, all of which can be defeated by punching them in the groin. I actually don't really mind these parts too much. What's always said about them is definitely true, but they're not terrible in any way, just maybe a bit bland. Though they become a little annoying the further into the game you get, all because the resource spawns become atrocious and most of it gets filled up with other junk like missile ammo, a new engine, nitro, and a bird. Gas is already rare when you start off, but it becomes near non-existent later on. There were times where I couldn't even get my fuel up to a single dot because I couldn't find any. I even stuck around the levels a bit longer waiting for more enemies to spawn hoping they drop some, but it eventually gets to a point where they won't drop anything, forcing me to go straight into a game over screen because of something I had no control over. Food also starts becoming irradiated the further you get, causing your health to decrease if you eat it. And the only way to avoid this is by picking up a Geiger counter that I think also might be a random drop. I should also bring up that your car's health or oil is also actually max's health in these sections, and in order to regain your health or repair your car, you have to collect food and water because, you know, that makes sense.
I'm a car too, you know.
Speaking of which, it looks like I forgot to feed my car. It won't stop yelling at me now. Hopefully there's like a Buc-ee's or something along the way I can maybe get a big bag of pretzels or whatever. Oh, shit! Well, this is what happens when you don't feed your car. You die. Outlander for the Genesis is undoubtedly a very flawed game, but fun nevertheless. What I ended up liking the most out of this game is that it's very arcadey. You just kind of pop it in and see how far you can go. Probably not very far because this is like a 3-hour game, but there are passwords if you want to continue where you died. It is a bit of a shame that this game is largely forgotten because I think with a bit of fine-tuning, a lot of the elements here can make for a pretty entertaining modern-day roguelite. Now with all of that being said, we should take a look at the SNES version and see how it differs. So off the bat, this one's in third person, which I honestly prefer because of the wider field of view. Just in general, I actually don't like first-person driving in most games. The button to shoot the shotgun isn't the same one that shoots the machine guns, which is very nice. It seems like you're given a bit more leeway with the shotgun too, you don't have to be as precise with it. I found myself consistently shooting at bikers without really putting in much effort. And I think the HUD is a bit more organized, it's way more readable with things like fuel and health being readily apparent to you. However, this all comes at the cost of the game running horrendously. My god. At what point do you consider the fact that maybe having this giant rear view mirror and having these side windows, both of which render multiple details in real time, is a bit unnecessary when it's on a system that obviously struggles to handle it? The Genesis version also had this issue, but it was only really noticeable when way too much was happening. Also, the SNES version is way harder. The driving controls aren't nearly as smooth as they are on the Genesis, and since the visuals are so much chunkier and pixelated, it's a lot harder to make out little things like the bombs the bikers throw or even aiming the interceptor's machine guns. It's hard to exactly tell the range of these things when the visual clarity is so bad. I mostly ignore the machine guns here and just try to go for drive-by shots since they're a lot easier to pull off. Also, because the rendering distance isn't so good here either, you tend to get hit with a lot of random turns you weren't anticipating, causing you to lose a good bit of health by veering off into road signs. Yeah, this game wasn't really made for the SNES. This would have been perfectly playable and probably easier than the Genesis version if it wasn't so bogged down by the system's limitations. Now, when it comes to anything playable, this is about as far as the history of Mad Max video games goes up until 2015. However, there were a few cancelled projects, and I feel like it'd be a bit of a missed opportunity to not bring them up.
Just identified a substantial buildup of hostile forces right here in our own backyard. I'm giving you the green light to clean them out. Gentlemen, you're the best. Get up there and prove it.
Okay, boys, let's kick some butt.
Action X for your VCR. Yeah. If it were any more real, it wouldn't be a game.
For the first one, we have to rewind all the way back to the year 1986. A branch of the popular toy manufacturing company Hasbro, named i6, were developing a video game console known as Project Nemo, or sometimes referred to as the Control Vision. What was so special and interesting about Nemo was that it was part of a small family of video game consoles that utilized VHS tapes and interactable FMV scenes. These essentially allowed you to literally play a movie. The thing is, they weren't nearly as cool as it sounds. Consoles like the Action Max only had games that were just cheaply made on-rail shooters that relied on a very inaccurate light gun, and all working on a single-track VHS. So whether you're playing terribly or being an absolute god, it won't matter because the video will just keep playing with no changes. The Interactive Vision, despite being a console that was targeted for babies, funnily enough was way more engaging and interactive in comparison by using multiple tracks that would switch depending on the player's actions. The Nemo was also going to have this, as well as trying to be appealing to a more general audience. Hasbro eventually invested $7 million into the project, and multiple games are being planned for it, like Night Trap, Sewer Shark, and Mad Max Autorama. A game that started off as a simple idea by one of i6 founders, Ken Melville. Melville realized that since the Nemo was more than capable of having multiple branching video tracks, a car action game akin to Mad Max would be absolutely perfect for the system. So his plan was to film a demo with nothing but a 16mm camera with a tripod, a Toyota Tacoma, and Hollywood stunt driver John Ward, who would drive recklessly around his ranch with Melville filming in the back holding on for dear life. Oh yeah, and there was an old car that they also threw off of a cliff. Obviously, once George Miller was presented with the demo, he fell in love with it and was totally on board with directing the whole project, and even suggesting the possibility of bringing Mel Gibson in. A storyboard for the game was being worked on with scenes for win and fail states, but then someone at Hasbro decided to plop down, watch one of the Mad Max movies, and they said, "Hey, wait a second. This isn't a kids movie." And yeah, that's how the whole project got cancelled. Okay, that's not exactly what happened, but basically someone at Hasbro caught wind of the fact that the Mad Max series is uber violent, and they weren't at all okay with that. Funny considering the fact that Night Trap, one of the games planned to be released on the Nemo, was eventually re-released for the Sega CD, and it actually turned out to be one of the most controversial games, being pulled from store shelves and Nintendo even barring it from being available on their systems. Not much else is known about Mad Max Autorama, and it being cancelled is not the worst thing to happen, honestly, especially since the Nemo never saw the light of day. Hasbro pulled the plug on it 2 months before its slated release date in 1989 because it was quickly becoming a very expensive console. The retail price for it reportedly would have been around $299, which is roughly $757 in today's money. It was a price that Hasbro deemed to be too uncompetitive to the NES.
There you are. Lungs still heaving, heart still beating. Yet you refuse to live. Perhaps you've forgotten who you are.
For the next cancelled Mad Max game, we now have to fast forward to the year 1999. A company known as Beam Software was once considered to be one of the most reputable game studios based out of Australia, known for games like The Hobbit, Hungry Horse, and The Way of the Exploding Fist. However, towards the late 90s, they were on the brink of closure until the company Infogrames bought them. Apparently, in the first meeting between Beam Software, now called Melbourne House, and Infogrames CEO Bruno Bonnell, they showed off a bunch of upcoming projects to him, and he just went, "You know, these are cool and everything, but I don't really give a shit." He then proceeded to halt further progress on those projects and immediately pushed Melbourne House to work on a new Mad Max game. Why? Because they just recently made the game Death Cars, and they were Australian. I know that sounds like a haha funny joke that I'd write, but I'm dead serious. That is like the sole reason why Infogrames bought Melbourne House. There was one teensy tiny problem, however. This was post-NES Mad Max, and if you remember what I said earlier, George Miller was so pissed off about that game being terrible that he started protecting the license to Mad Max. In fact, he was so disinterested in another game that his production company Kennedy Miller Mitchell were considering making a department that would just decline any offers. So what was Bonnell's solution to that? He wanted to give Miller an offer he couldn't refuse. Infogrames provided months of funding to Melbourne House so they could put production in this game, now titled Mad Max Asylum, into full throttle. Brainstorming the gameplay, characters, making demo cutscenes, doing everything in their power to make this game so convincing that George Miller has to change his mind. The story was supposed to take place years after Beyond Thunderdome, with a Max who is deeply broken and has lost everything he ever cared for, until eventually rescuing a young girl named Jessie from a villainous gang. Afterwards, Max would play the role of a father figure looking after Jessie, partially because she shared the same name as his wife from the first movie. Also, the leader of that villainous gang would be a cannibal who'd gain certain superpowers from the limbs he ate. Like if he ate a leg, he'd gain super speed, and an arm would give him super strength. His catchphrase would also be,
Time to eat.
I don't know about you, but I feel like this is a little out there for Mad Max. Like, even with how insane the world has become in Fury Road, having a warlord that has cannibalistic superpowers is maybe a little too fantastical for the franchise. I mean, Immortan Joe is just a dude. Yeah, he's an insane cult leader with an army of suicidal warboys, but he doesn't really have any superpowers. Same goes for Anti-Entity, Humongous, and Toe Cutter. These are all just people with a few loose screws. Speaking of loose screws, the feral kid from Road Warrior was supposed to make a return in the game, all grown up and being the leader of his own gang. Max's dog was also supposed to make a return, sort of. And of course, there was the Interceptor. The lead producer of the project, David Giles, heavily emphasized how important it is for the team to not only nail down the Interceptor, but the game's driving mechanics, because ultimately that's what's going to matter the most to Miller at the end of the day. In a surprising and unexpected turn of events, Melbourne House eventually got to meet with the big man himself, and apparently this entire meeting played out really well. Miller was super receptive, curious, and responsive to a lot of the concepts and ideas the studio presented. All was going well until the team brought out a 500-page design document. Miller, wanting to take a gander at this ginormous document, opened it up, and the first thing he coincidentally landed on was a 3-page list of the reasons why Beyond Thunderdome sucks. Oh, come on guys, it wasn't that bad. Sure, the movie was going for more of a PG-13 kind of vibe, the soundtrack is completely unfitting to the atmosphere of Mad Max, the first and second half of the movie feel disjointed, the second half of the movie's plot might have been ripped off from the novel Ridley Walker, the cars look like this, and instead of driving around on something similar to his Interceptor, Max instead has camels. But you know, if it wasn't for Beyond Thunderdome, we'd never have Master Blaster, a character so good, Stevie Wonder made a song about him. So what do you have to say about that, you filthy fucking smeg?
Lift embargo.
Apparently Miller laughed this whole thing off, but I don't know guys, actions sometimes speak louder than words. Despite how well the meeting went, he ended up rejecting the entire project for reasons unknown. And honestly, I don't think it's because of top 10 reasons why Beyond Thunderdome sucks. I think it was mostly because Miller was already in a planning phase for making a Mad Max tie-in game for Fury Road. Now I know what you might be thinking, Fury Road, didn't that come out like 300 years later? And yes, Fury Road did come out later, but it was in 2015, not the year 2300. The thing about Fury Road was that it was in development hell for ages. The idea for the film has been floating around Miller's head since 1987, and there were attempts to finally begin shooting it sometime around the early 2000s, except all of that got delayed to the 2010s because of the economy going down the crapper caused by the ongoing Iraq War. And also due to unforeseen rainy weather, Miller's go-to shooting location of Broken Hill, Australia became a blossoming flowery forest, totally not suitable for a Mad Max movie. So he packed his bags, which included an armada of 500 custom-made cars, most of which probably weighed more than a full-grown elephant, and flew over to Namibia to get shooting done over there, only adding more to the movie's already bloated budget. And that's not even scratching the surface of the hell Miller, the cast and crew had to go through to finally get this movie out there. The making of Fury Road is a topic that I unfortunately don't have much time to cover in full detail, so if you want to learn more, I suggest looking into the book Blood, Sweat, and Chrome by Kyle Buchanan that covers everything that happened behind the scenes. But yeah, back when finishing Fury Road first seemed like a tangible, plausible goal, Miller was planning on making a tie-in game for it. At first he met with Brian Fargo, founder of Interplay, who were behind the original Fallout games, but all of that very quickly fell through. And then in 2008, Miller met up with Cory Barlog, known for his work on the God of War games. Barlog actually left Sony Santa Monica to work with Miller on this project, but because of the never-ending delays the movie got hit with, Warner Bros. Decided that Miller isn't capable of handling multiple projects at once, so they took the game out of his hands, undid everything him and Barlog did, and gave the game to Avalanche Studios along with a whole bunch of assets and documentation for Fury Road and subsequent films. Avalanche used all of that without Miller's guidance or even his permission. In fact, he's not even credited, and what we ended up with as a result of all of that is a game that's a weird amalgamation of both pre-existing things as well as things that Miller hasn't even established yet. The story, for example, is loosely based off the Fury Road prequel comic where Max basically assumes the role of a father figure to a family of slaves named Hope and Glory, who end up dying to a gang of buzzards, leading to Max becoming insane at the start of Fury Road. In-game, however, it is randomly mentioned that Glory is the daughter of Dementus, a villain that would make his first debut in Furiosa almost a full decade after this game's release. And instead of being killed by the buzzards, both Hope and Glory died to the hands of the main villain, Scrotus, yet another character that eventually popped up in Furiosa, though much different than how he is in-game. There's some other things too, like vehicle designs, the mention of events like the Wasteland Wars, and other minor characters popping up. Not to mention the fact that this game could also contain spoilers for any future Mad Max plans. We're just not entirely sure what those spoilers are yet because those plans haven't been made. In a last-ditch attempt to get a Fury Road tie-in game made, a video game division of Miller's production company acquired original LA Noire devs Team Bondi along with Chrome Studios shortly after their closure. However, nothing really came out of this other than a cancelled game and Happy Feet 2. Now you might be sitting there seething at the fact that Avalanche bastardized Miller's ideas, but I don't think they really deserve much hate for what they did. Looking into it, it seems like Avalanche just got shoved headfirst into a fiery feud between Miller and Warner Bros., and much like how Fury Road was a hellish nightmare to produce, so was the game largely due to Warner Bros' own incompetence. Avalanche's founder Christopher Sundberg has gone on record to say that early on Warner Bros. Were really pushing for the game to be completely linear despite the studio's pitches for an open world, and that they even cancelled the fully finished DLC because of the game's poor sales, caused by the fact that it released on the same day as Phantom Pain, which unsurprisingly was also a decision that Warner Bros. Made. Adding even more fuel to the fire, Miller has even stated recently that the game disappoints him, something that was very disheartening for Avalanche to hear for sure, but to play the role of devil's advocate here, it's kind of understandable when you consider not just the history of this game, but the troubled history of Mad Max games as a whole. It seems like Miller always wanted to be at the helm of making his own game, but every time he was given the golden chance to do so, it always got ripped from him, as was the case for Autorama or Fury Road, which was the furthest he ever got in this whole video game endeavor, only for it to be pulled from him by Warner Bros. And given to some studio to complete with none of his input or supervision, not even a little thank you. If all of that happened to me, honestly, it'd burn my ass too. And it sort of begs the question, is there a possibility that we will ever get a true Miller Mad Max game? Maybe? It seems like Miller and Hideo Kojima are getting along pretty well with them singing praises to each other's work, but will something ever come out of this, or is this all just talk? I don't know. Personally, if you ask me, it's a little hard to imagine how a Miller-Kojima collaboration would work. These dudes have entirely different ways of presenting their stories. Furthermore, Kojima's games wouldn't exactly fit with the energy of Mad Max, I don't think. On top of that, Miller's not getting any younger, and it's hard to say if he's got enough gas in the tank to take on any more creative projects, especially when it comes to a future Mad Max film, given how physically demanding they seem to be. Really, the best thing we could do is just hope for the best. Hope we get to see a true Miller Mad Max game, or hope that someday we'll get to see Mad Max The Wasteland, the next installment in the series that we've been teased with since Fury Road's release.
You know, hope is a mistake. If you can't fix what's broken, you'll go insane.